Yesterday I talked about how we need a new paradigm, how the existing economic paradigm just is not functioning anymore. And I pointed to the drastic corrected projections of the IMF of $18 trillion for global GDP over 2 years, reduction, and similar big corrections in the Congressional Budget Office in the United States, in the face of massive application of the aggregate demand and monetarist models, 619 reductions in interest rates and vast quantitative easing programs where the government actually buys where the central bank buys assets in big volumes. The total is over $11 trillion around the world to date, and huge issuances of government debt at negative interest rates. Well, last night we got another view of that paradigm, of what I believe is a failed economic paradigm that can't really come to terms with capitalism. And it was a fascinating speech, excellently presented and gripping to hear, but it was fundamentally wrong. And this fundamental error is critical to grasp in understanding the nature of capitalism. At the center of this model of the economy that Rolnick presented is an agent that is usually depicted in Latin as homo economicus, as economic man. And that economic man really was pretty much at the center of Adam Smith's economic model, and it's been at the center of most images of capitalism ever since. I believe that it really is, in psychological terms, it reproduces the Skinner box psychology that was briefly a big fashion in the West after the Second World War. Professor at Harvard who believed that human beings were essentially tabula rasa. There's nothing there. And the brilliant professor, if he could control the contents of this Skinner box through stimulus and response, he could transform human beings into any desired model. And this is the Skinner box model. And it's stimulus and response. It's responding to carrots and sticks, rewards and punishments. And that is the image of man at the center of the most prevalent models of capitalism today. And that's why I believe that a new information theory concept of economics is not only valuable in understanding economic life, but it also is invaluable in the defense of capitalism. Because Rolnick's vision, which was a kind of dismal science of special interests and corruption as almost the dominant force in the system, can be replaced with a model which is dominated not by incentives, that understands that capitalism is not chiefly an incentive system. It's chiefly an information system. And that shift can allow you to actually understand how capitalism works better than these models of carrots and sticks and stimulus and response that have been almost entirely abandoned in psychology but persist in economics in the midst of all our models. And it's really a kind of degraded image of human beings that renders them a function of their environment rather than an agent of progress and creation. Now, in developing an information theory of capitalism, I came from 20 years writing about telecom and the internet and technology, and discovering the centrality of information theory as developed, perhaps sprang first from Kurt Gödel in 1931, his presentation of his paper about incompleteness, which was heard by John von Neumann, and which transformed John von Neumann's entire career. He came to this assemblage of all the leading mathematicians and scientists of Europe under the aegis of Hilbert, the great German mathematician, to complete the mathematical agenda of a complete mathematical expression of all science in a deterministic model. And at the time, von Neumann was the leading exponent of this Hilbert agenda to explain everything in mathematics. Von Neumann had actually developed the mathematical theory of quantum mechanics and was thus the most successful exponent of Hilbert's ideas. And Gödel was this graduate student who wasn't even on the main program. He was on a little side conference, and von Neumann dropped by to hear the papers in the side conference and heard Hilbert's paper and decided that it completely overthrew the entire Hilbert scheme. And von Neumann, the greatness of von Neumann, and in my view, he's the greatest figure of 20th century science, and perhaps in some ways the greatest figure in the 20th century, most consequential and important figure. But von Neumann went to that meeting, listened to Gödel, and concluded that that whole mathematical agenda to which von Neumann had devoted his life had to be abandoned. And instead, that the future would be in information science. And the model which Gödel established was kind of to conceive of a computational system that proved that any logical scheme that could be embodied in computational logic necessarily depends on propositions outside itself and unprovable within the scheme itself. And in developing this proof that Gödel accomplished, he actually conceived a Turing machine, essentially. Gödel's whole model, the scheme by which he proved this proposition that every logical scheme is necessarily dependent on propositions outside the logical scheme that cannot be reduced to the logical system, was a computer. And so von Neumann devoted himself to computer science, and and the von Neumann machine, of course, became the dominant computer architecture of the 20th century, and it's surviving well into the 21st century in many forms. So, but this has economic implications, because After reading about von Neumann in this crucial meeting at Königsberg, I read Albert Hirschman on entrepreneurship. And Albert Hirschman wrote that creativity always comes as a surprise to us. If it didn't, we wouldn't need it. And planning socialism would work. The reason socialism doesn't work is because creativity is the heart of all economic growth and progress, and creativity always comes as a surprise to us. So any economic model that attempts to be deterministic, that like the Smith model of capitalism was inspired by Isaac Newton's deterministic model of physics, cannot accommodate the most crucial human faculty, which is creativity. And and creativity always comes as a surprise to us. Now, if creativity is the most powerful and important force in economics, how can you model it? What kind of model could accommodate creativity? And thus, when you explore information theory, you discover that Claude Shannon, who really consummated information theory in papers in 1948, showed that information itself is best defined as surprise. That's what it is, surprisal. It's only the unexpected bits that matter. If everything I say today you already understand, you already know, I've communicated zero information. That's a zero information speech. Only the unexpected bits constitute information across a carrier in information theory. So Shannon's identification of information as surprise gave a way to accommodate the surprises of human creativity in an economic model. And based on information theory. And if wealth is knowledge and growth is learning, and these are forms of human progress that can't be reduced to the Homo economicus Skinner box model of the human being as somehow a function of forces outside himself. And I believe that even the Austrian model of entrepreneurship sometimes is too limited because it focuses on the entrepreneur responding to opportunities beyond himself. He's an arbitrageur. Or in the words of Paul Romer, who wrote, who's the leading theorist of entrepreneurship these days at Berkeley, Paul Romer, he may have moved to Harvard recently, I'm not sure, but Paul Romer defines entrepreneurship as reassembling chemical elements. In other words, the material foundation is central, and the entrepreneur is kind of a function of the material basis represented by chemical elements. And because Paul Romer calculates astronomical numbers of potential combinations of chemical elements, he offers a broad range of possible entrepreneur entrepreneurial activity. But still, it's ultimately what I call a materialist superstition. The idea that ideas and creations and innovations can all be reduced to their material substrates, and that somehow the human being is sort of trapped in this material world, the materialist superstition. But information theory gives you a path to escape this predicament and to recognize that human beings are creative. And I like to say human beings are creative in the image of their creator. It's a hierarchical universe, and ideas and creations cannot be reduced to the manipulation of incentives or the material of chemical elements and other ways in which economists try to escape the recognition that the heart of economic activity transcends calculation, really. It's unexpected, it's surprising, it's news, it's what you don't know rather than what you do know. And it changes the focus from mere efficiency, which you could calculate the various efficiencies of various industrial arrangements, as Rolnick last night was doing. He was presenting all these industrial models, different industries, different markets, as dominated by particular oligopolies or monopolies. The fact is that actual monopolies are almost non-existent outside of government. So it's always oligopolies or near monopolies, and we're somehow supposed to be horrified by the possibility that two beer companies that make almost indistinguishable products might merge and somehow wreak havoc on the economy. But these are static models of efficiency, and this is another way in which the original Adam Smith model, as brilliant and beautiful and advanced as it was for its era, and as powerful as it's been in shaping human aspiration ever since, that Adam Smith model did have that fundamental limitation, which Adam Smith himself kind of understood. His first book was The Theory of Moral Sentiments, after all. But ultimately, Adam Smith had an efficiency model. The pin factory is his great example, showing how the division of labor in the manufacture of pins could drastically, by a factor of thousands, increase the productivity of each individual worker, as opposed to an environment where each individual worker had to build the entire pin himself. So it showed the division of labor, and a key Adam Smith proposition is that the division of labor, which was his proxy for creativity and expansion and growth, the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. And this sort of, like Rolnick last night, had an echo of this and all these static models of different industries, as if they aren't constantly changing and the boundaries aren't constantly altering, that a situation one year completely changes the next year. All those taxi monopolies suddenly being exposed to attack from Uber, whatever, there's a constant upsurge of creative destruction, as Ori has been telling you about. So escaping this Skinner box incentive structure allows you to actually examine what entrepreneurs do, and allows you to recognize that in entrepreneurship is a crucial dimension of altruism. That is, entrepreneurs have to be oriented toward the needs of others. They have to collaborate with others. They have to have an imaginative understanding of the future needs of others. They have to be, in other words, the whole model of selfishness as kind of the key element of enterprise is the opposite of the truth. When you actually contemplate selfish people, what you find them doing is conspiring with others to get special treatment from government. Self-interest leads as by an invisible hand to an ever-growing welfare state, to socialism and crony capitalism, not to a prosperous entrepreneurial economy. It's because of this Homo economicus error and this effort to reduce economics to a material model, capitalism has been caricatured as somehow a predatory expression of greed and selfishness. And I think that is the opposite of the case. If you're I'm a venture capitalist on the side and have been for years, and small fund, but a completely self-interested entrepreneur is one of the sure negative signals you get. If the guy isn't really interested in what he's doing and serving others in his company and in the world, he's unlikely to succeed in enterprise. Except in this crony socialist model where he collaborates with government to establish monopoly positions in the way that Rolnick, Guy Rolnick was saying. So, but this efficiency model, which really sees innovation as a process of breaking up an existing product into its components and then spinning off the components to separate productive processes, and thus expanding the efficiency of the whole venture, the whole industry, in the image of that pin factory at the heart of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, is a great mistake. That is not how enterprise is created. The transistor was not created by taking all the components of the vacuum tube and improving them by enhancing the specialization and production of vacuum tubes. The automobile was not produced by taking all the various components of the horseless carriage or the horse-drawn carriage and farming them out and producing them more efficiently. The gains from efficiency in capitalism are relatively insignificant. That's why if all the various advances that Rolnick was recommending implicitly last night, eliminate this monopoly, this oligopoly, this concentration of power, the result would have been relatively minor increases in efficiency. But all the gains in economics really come not from efficiency, but creativity and effectiveness. As Peter Drucker, the guy who said, don't solve problems, pursue opportunities, puts it, what's important is not doing things right, but finding the right things to do. It's not of increasing the efficiency of producing existing products that matters. It's generating new products, new surprises, unexpected goods and services that derive from inspired understanding of the needs of others by entrepreneurs. So it's creativity, and creativity is always comes as a surprise to us, and the way to capture it in an economic model is the information theory model, and Shannon and von Neumann described it as entropy. It's and in my book, Knowledge and Power, I go through how that works and how it interest rates generally signify the average returns across an economy, and profit and loss are the surprising returns. So the real measure of entropy of profit is surprisal, unexpectedness, and it's measured in Shannon terms as entropy, and which is disorder, unexpected outcomes, and so it gives you a model of profit, and I think profit really is an index of altruism for a company. Profit measures the difference between the value of a good, in essence, to the producer and to the consumer. And the bigger the difference between the value of the product to the producer and the value to the consumer, the bigger the profit, the bigger the margin. And profit really signifies unexpected outcomes, unexpected satisfaction of often unknown needs of consumers. So when you understand that essentially capitalism is a model led by creators in the image of their creator, creative destruction, creative innovation, then you can understand something about the history of the 20th century and the paramount roles of Jews in the history of the 20th century. And Bob wanted me to give some of my ideas from the Israel test, which is my book about Israel that I wrote 4 or 5 years ago, the Israel test. And And I think von Mises had a great insight back in 1940 when he was asked to do an analysis of the economy of Austria for Otto von Habsburg. It was of the then the Habsburg Empire, and von Mises, Ludwig von Mises, the great Austrian economist, said that he had a sad message for von Habsburg. He said that Austria's economy, the reason Austria's economy was suffering was that any such country, Austria had about 6.5 million people at the time, and any such country like Austria was necessarily dependent on the genius of its entrepreneurs to create export industries. If Austria was going to be industrially successful, it would have to export. As an agrarian country, Austria could only support a little over 1 million people, von Mises estimated. But with the genius of entrepreneurs, Austria was capable of supporting its population of 6.5 million. And that was all made possible, according to von Mises, by just 1,000 leading entrepreneurs in Austria, leading creative figures in the Austrian economy who produced the export goods that could sustain the Austria and feed its people. And von Mises estimated that 75% at least of those 1,000 people were Jews. And all these, and 250,000 of middle management in Austria were Jewish. And of these people, by the end of the war, there were only 216 Jews left. And von Mises said that once you lose this entrepreneurial creativity, all your great industries are nothing so much as so much concrete and rotted concrete and rocks and old abandoned wires, and I can't remember the full image. He's got an evocative image of piles of rubble and wire as all that remains when the entrepreneurial genius departs. And the same story, almost in detail, occurred in Hungary. And Budapest and Vienna were the most prosperous cities virtually in Europe, and the fastest growing and the most industrially progressive, and they both collapsed with the departure of Jewish creativity and entrepreneurship after the rise of the Nazis. This model and really captures much of the history of the 20th century, which I describe in the Israel test. The departure of the Jews from Budapest and Vienna to New York and Los Angeles and Los Alamos, and finally Israel was changed the whole history of the 20th century. And the epitome of it was the Manhattan Project that would have been impossible without the immigration of scores of Jewish scientists who essentially achieved the Manhattan Project and thus brought the Second World War to a close. And in the process also revitalizing the economies of New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and really forging the heart of 20th century history. So, and a similar history, which again illustrates the paramount role of creative entrepreneurs in economic growth, where growth is learning and the accumulation of knowledge and experimental capitalism, happened in Palestine. And there were several phases of this development in Palestine. And I'll just go, you know the history probably better than I do in many respects, but some of the economic details are strangely unknown and misrepresented. The first phase was really in the 1880s when the first 19th century big immigration occurred in Palestine. And at the time, there were 200 or 300,000 Arabs, and they were in desperate condition. They really lived amid malarial swamps and a wasteland of rocks and rubble, and really the potential for accommodating any more people was very small. And the development where some 5.5 million Arabs now live in what was then the Palestine, with life expectancies of 73 years, was an accomplishment of massive expansion of the very carrying capacity of the land through this original migration of settlers who drained the swamps and leached the salt from the soils and terraced the hills and drilled wells and waterworks, built bridges, planted literally millions of trees, eucalyptus around Tel Aviv, transforming that area from a malarial swamp with 400 people in huts to the foundation for one of the world's great cities. The whole dimensions of the land were drastically expanded, which attracted a massive Arab immigration to Palestine. And the whole idea of displacement is totally nonsensical in view of the massive and continual expansion of Arab populations beyond the highest they ever reached 1,000 years ago at the peak. More Arabs live in Palestine than ever before in history. So how can we be talking about displacement? And all this was enabled by this massive entrepreneurial contribution by Jewish immigrants. And the proof of this is really offered by the counterexample of Jordan. Jordan had a 4 times larger land area, larger population in medieval times. It had the same physical conditions, same Jordan River, same Rift Valley, same climate, same rich river plains, but its agricultural output was 1/5 of Israel's and Palestine at that point. and its population density was 1/10. And so it really, output per capita was 1/50th. And the only difference was no Jews in Jordan. So, and the result for Arabs of this period of development was they had their population growth rate was 16.2% a year, the highest in the entire world, and the highest, far higher than Arabs anywhere else in the world without but what brought this to a halt was the famous Arab awakening, which is ordinarily considered to be some heroic manifestation of Arab nationalism. But but Churchill really identified its roots in the infiltration of Nazis, the Nazi movement into the Arab world in the 1930s. And that really was the root of that phenomenon, which halted much of the growth and progress at the time. So after this pre-era, there were three, after the establishment of Israel in 1948, there were really three economic eras. And the first is of post-war to 1967, when Gaza and the West Bank, Gaza was under, and Sinai were ruled by Egypt, and the West Bank by Jordan. That's phase one. And phase two was 1967 to 1990, when the whole region was under Israeli administration. And phase three is 1990 to now, essentially, where where the dominant force really is the UN refugee organization, which has this peculiar and perverse role, which is familiar to most of you. But the test of a culture is what it creates rather than what it claims. And this creative entrepreneurship by relatively small groups of geniuses, as we might depict them, has really been the most powerful force in world history in the 20th century. And that role is completely ignored by the kind of Rolnick model of how the economy works. Well, in phase one, between 48 and 67, it was pretty stagnant under the West Bank under Jordan and the Gaza under Egypt. And the Arab population rose about 20%, but incomes were pretty stagnant and nothing very exciting happened. And the leading Palestinian entrepreneurs, the people who were the kind of von Mises figures in Palestine, mostly left for Amman, Damascus, and Beirut. The opportunities just were not present between 48 and 67 in the West Bank and Gaza. Phase two is the most amazing story. And this has been told brilliantly by Ephraim Karsh in a whole book about this period. But this was the period when Israel took over the West Bank and Gaza. And under Israeli management, these areas became one of the most dynamic economies on the entire planet. With a decade of growth, of 25% per year between 1967 and 1979. Annual investment rising from 10 million in 69 to 600 million in 91. The Arab population tripled. Its lifespans increased from 52 years on average to 73 years. 261 new towns were established to accommodate the tripling of the Arab population. 7 new universities launched, and 2,000 industrial plants. It was just awesome economic growth. There was the 4th fastest growth in the world during that period between 87 and 1990, roughly. And during this time, Arafat had been banished to Tunisia, and the PLO lost their dominance. And the Palestinian Arabs were collaborating heavily with Jews in all these new industries. It was a moment, a golden moment of opportunity that was halted in its tracks by the intervention of the peace process in Oslo, which gave Arafat, and with Nazi links, control over the Palestinians, and brought to a halt this collaborative economic ascent that was achieved between 67 and 87. And that really is the critical story. And it does show that if people can pass the Israel test, learn how to collaborate with entrepreneurial genius rather than attack it, resent it, envy it, and attack it, you can have an actual golden era, a boom in the desert. And that is really a story that fits the notion of enterprise as a function of creative entrepreneurs, relatively small numbers. You know, one of the remarkable discoveries I made was, and I'm sure other people know about it, but Chaim Weizmann gave a speech around 1900, a little after 1900 in London, when he was trying to raise money for Technion, to establish Technion. And he gave a speech in London, and he said, my big problem in establishing a technical and engineering university in Israel is that, or in Palestine, is that there are no Jewish intellectuals. The only Jewish intellectuals who have any impact on history were Marx and Spinoza, according to Weizmann back in 1905. This is an amazing efflorescence of through the 20th century that transformed the world, and the key force was Jewish entrepreneurship. And this is true in the United States. There are all sorts of studies made in the United States that shows that studies at MIT that show the greater entrepreneurial appetite and creativity of Jews at MIT than other ethnic groups represented. And it's an amazing story, but it is, in a way, a great man's story of history, and great man's stories of history are no longer very popular. But if you have economic policies that punish the rich, as they call it. High tax rates don't stop you from being rich. If you already are rich, you can figure out ways to deploy your money so you escape the high tax rates. High tax rates stop you from getting rich. And so what high tax rates almost always mean is an attack on the class of creative entrepreneurs who generate all the wealth and prosperity for the world. Thank you very much. I'd be delighted to answer questions.
Given as an example, Uber as a company that broke the monopoly of taxis. But as far as I know, the monopoly succeeded to elect these monopoly rights for at least, I don't know, 30 years? 30, 40 years? I don't know how long the monopoly succeeded to...
The taxi, various taxi monopolies.
So don't you think that in some, even rare cases, the government should interrupt the market?
Oh, yeah, I'm not one of the key points I made yesterday, or 2 days ago, is that a key principle of information theory is you need a low entropy carrier with no surprises in order to bear high entropy information, surprising, newsworthy information. And that, and I believe that the government does have an important role in establishing this low entropy carrier. I use the analogy of the electromagnetic spectrum. The reason all information tends to migrate to the electromagnetic spectrum, whether optical signals and fiber lines or wireless propagation across the land. The reason is because the electromagnetic spectrum is guaranteed regular through the speed of light, and which can't be manipulated. So it's always possible to separate the high entropy message from the carrier that bears it. And my analogy for the role of government in establishing law, contracts, peace, defense, all these crucial functions, I don't think do emerge spontaneously. I have knowledge and power. I show that the theory of spontaneous order gets it wrong. That order is not spontaneous. That takes political leadership and often religious faith, family disciplines, all these real commitments fostered in part by government policies that are not corrupt and unpredictable. Predictable, reliable government policies make possible to have a creative economy with spontaneous innovation. And innovation and creativity is spontaneous and unexpected, while order is not spontaneous. Order actually has to be imposed, and it entails sacrifice and discipline and the IDF and all the various commitments of the law. And so I think there's definitely a role for government, and I don't think that the best governmental institutions just spontaneously emerge. I think that they require leadership and political inspiration and charisma and commitment.
talk a lot about the new information of currency, the new currency of information,
Oh, yeah.
and how information is the heart of the advancement economy. And obviously, since information is relatively easily replicable, we need to create an incentive system to keep creating it. But we also live in a time where there's a lot of criticism about intellectual property rights and copyright law in the U.S., especially, but not only in the drug industry. So I would like to know, how do you see the whole intellectual property rights system right now?
That's the whole issue of intellectual property is very challenging, and it has to be done really well. If you're going to have a patent system, you want to have the key principles which apply to U.S. patents from the beginning were non-obviousness and reduction to practice were two key requirements. And these requirements are pretty rigorous, and they entail a really knowledgeable and capable patent system and personnel to administer. And what's been happening is the patent law in the United States has been all twisted by, there's too many patents, the non-obvious principle gets ignored. I mean, in software, many of the software patents are effectively obvious if you have the previous software platform assumed. A lot of these, I think a lot of software should be copyrighted rather than patented. That 17 years or whatever the time span is preposterous in these industries that are changing overnight. Pharmaceuticals are a different problem, and the problem here is that is in the United States, which really sets the standard for global pharmaceutical regulation. The FDA imposes essentially a $2 billion toll on the production of a new pharmaceutical product. And there's a brilliant book by Peter Huber called The Cure in the Code, which he's one of the leading intellectual property theorists in the United States. And he's written a brilliant book called The Cure in the Code. But lots of reforms are needed in pharmaceuticals because they've made it too difficult to, if you have to pay $2 billion to get your drug through, it means that you necessarily need to have a vast market, which means you have to sell lots of these units, or else sell each unit for some egregious price. And the whole system has really reached an impasse today, and I think massive reforms are needed. And I think they, right now, the way it works is if the particular disease is fashionable or is publicly sensitive, the waivers are offered. So most of the real innovations in pharmaceuticals these days come through waivers. And there are all sorts of waivers for AIDS, so there have been lots of progress in that arena. But this is not a low entropy carrier if it's based on the caprice of the regulator about which diseases deserve special waivers. And so there are lots of problems in intellectual property. And then in the United States, we have the ridiculous Texas rotten borough problem, where all the class action suits against innovations all get litigated in a particular district in Texas where they got a bunch of judges that have been completely purchased lock, stock, and barrel by the class action tort lawyers who are the leading supporters of the Democratic Party in the United States are the tort lawyers.
I'm sorry, what did you say was the name of the author?
Peter Huber, Huber, and it's called The Cure in the Code.
Thank you.
Sorry.
You spoke a little bit about Palestinian economic growth and then decline after the Oslo Accords. The question is, do you have any thoughts about what could be done in the future?
The question is whether what I think can be done in the future to make possible further achievements in economic growth, like the period between 1967 and 87, which is an existence proof that this kind of growth is possible. As a matter of fact, during that period, the West Bank was kind of a wild east for we call the Wild West in the United States, but for Israeli entrepreneurs, and actually growth in the territories was a lot faster than growth in Israel, which actually reached a terrible crisis in the mid-'80s that you all know about. And so, but I think that it's not a great prescription, but it's just going to be necessary to just hang in there and outlast this current regime in the territories that is really devoted chiefly to attacking Israel rather than to achieving any kind of growth. They are welfare clients, and they're dependent on foreign aid, and foreign aid fosters socialism almost always because foreign aid goes to governments, and so when government is with foreign aid is the chief source of funds in a society, all activity focuses on the elites in the government, and tribal conflicts are exacerbated, and conspiracy theories run wild, and it's Peter Bauer has written several great books on the malignancy of the foreign aid process in general. And what we have here is a massive foreign aid process tied to the requirement that all generations of Palestinians uphold this bizarre myth of displacement, and all their children and children's children on into the generations all look forward to this massive payday in the future of some kind of apocalyptic rain of myrrh from the heavens. And this is, and I don't think, I just think that whole system has to be outlasted. And while at the same time opportunities are opened for collaborative enterprise, constant efforts, which will mostly be spurned, but should be made available so that there is an alternative path for the most creative and committed Arabs. And I think that's, I mean, they can see that the Arabs in Israel are the richest Arabs in the average incomes of Arabs in Israel are about 30% higher than the average incomes of Arabs anywhere else in the Middle East. So they can see that there are opportunities, and those opportunities just have to be maintained as much as possible until Israel's getting stronger and stronger, and in comparison to its enemies, I think. And so it's going to, and I hope that the new American administration will be less adversarial than the previous one.
Would you also consider recommend cutting foreign aid to Israel?
I don't care. It depends what. I mean, Obama had.
I think that actually it has also very negative effects on Israel.
Yeah.
And so it's just like.
Yeah. I think that, Obama had Netanyahu where he wanted him. And, for Israel to spurn that American agreement at this point, he thought would cause more negative repercussions in the midst of our political campaign than just accepting the deal and hoping to have a better evolution of it in the future. I mean, it's a lousy deal, which is essentially just subsidies from Israel to the, it's just sort of laundering money from the U.S. government to U.S. military contractors. And there's some benefits to Israel, but I think that a much better deal will be negotiable in the future that recognizes the critical role of Israel in U.S. defense. I mean, as I said at the beginning yesterday, the U.S. needs Israel, I believe, just as much as Israel needs the U.S. I mean, my book is all about so-called American companies that really all their key innovations and products and many of their factories and most of their innovations come from Israel. Intel is a history that I know intimately. I've written the history of Intel. And Intel is really as much an Israeli company as an American company. Without Dov Froman and the invention of the EEPROM, Intel probably would never have been able to launch its microprocessor. And when it did launch microprocessors, about half of them were designed in Israel, and including probably the most important one, which was the 8088, that was the key CPU for the IBM personal computer that popularized the PC. And all this stuff, I can go Cisco, Internet, all these, not to mention all the network security companies, they're all deeply dependent on innovations from Israel. And so this whole myth that Americans cultivate, and particularly in the current administration, that somehow Israel's a dependent that is getting foreign aid is nonsense. Israel gives massive foreign aid to the United States.
I just wanted to know that it was surprising to me, but I've looked at World Bank statistics of GDP growth per capita, and in the past year, the country with the highest GDP growth per capita was Palestine in the whole world, which is about, I think, 9 or 10%. So I think it's really interesting to look at the Oslo corridor 20 years ago. So it would be really interesting to look at the past few years where they had massive growth in GDP per capita.
Yeah, I think those two phenomena, if you drill down, during the 67 to 87 period, there was almost no foreign aid for Palestine. It was just a trivial factor in that growth process, while the existing Palestinian economy is just overwhelmed by flows of foreign aid of different kinds from, and those GDP numbers are kind of UN cosmetics as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I don't think they're very significant. The actual experience is that since the last decade or so, the incomes in the territories have actually dropped 40% or roughly, and under these existing regimes, economic growth is not a desired or particular. I mean, economic growth is considered the enemy of, even by Rashid Khalidi, who's a leading economist of the Palestinians, and who was Obama's first press secretary as a senator way back in the day. And Khalidi's brother, and under Khalidi's editorship, did this analysis of the Palestinian economy and acknowledged that the Palestinians were benefiting from Israeli growth in a way that might be the envy of other third world countries around the world, but that this was destroying the morale of the Palestinians, who thus were being lured away from their appropriate role in the jihad. So, I mean, if you have leading economists, and Obama's chief advisor for years shaped Obama's view of the Palestinians, was Rashid Khalidi, believes that any economic growth detracts from the participation in the jihad. You got an impossible situation. So I don't. I think you just got to hang in there, and with the understanding that the Israeli innovative sector is really the most powerful in the whole global economy. It's better than Silicon Valley from my point of view at the moment. I find more companies over here that are really valuable, making serious technological advances as opposed to social networking of frivolities in Israel.
I'm not sure if it's true, but as like an outside observer, it seems that Israeli tech companies have a habit of, making a great technological breakthrough and then the investor selling the company and just making a huge profit. Again, unlike, big companies like Google, YouTube that just grew. So I wanted to ask you if that assumption is correct, and if so, what's your opinion about that?
Yeah. This is the question of why Israel hasn't developed as large companies as Silicon Valley, and the reason is that it's usually opportune when a particular Israeli invention gets global reach and impact to have the headquarters in the United States rather than in Israel. And it's just more convenient for various reasons in the sales and marketing and global development happens in the United States. I don't know about Uber, but Google has lots of important operations in Israel, and IBM is an American company, of course, but whenever IBM does something really extraordinary, like Watson, remember winning the chess champion, beating the Kasparov or whoever, that was the Haifa IBM Center. And, you know, it just so happens that many of these big U.S. companies are actually have their technological heart in Israel, and Israelis benefit from them. Israel benefits from Intel in all sorts of ways, and Cisco, which is heavily an Israeli operation, and these are. Google has Waze, you know, which I assume is Waze still going, is popular in Israel, right? And it's now the heart of the Google social driving technology, you know, and is being incorporated increasingly in their leading edge autonomous car project. It's just that that's what's happening, and whether, you know, it's, you know, it makes much less difference, I think, than you might imagine whether a particular headquarters is in Sunnyvale or Netanya. But Intel really is an Israeli company. It has been almost from the outset. It was well, I tell all those stories in the Israel test. Okay, thank you.